This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, housing at all times remains a critical issue. We have three related stories, one that is promising, one that is discouraging, and the other about the plight of a former Saints player and the hardships that he has encountered. Elsewhere, a judge's recusal of himself from a trial uncovered some of the background intrigues in the judicial system. And on the waterfront, a looming longshoremen strike raises concerns about the supply chain. We also will take a look at a preservationist group's latest list of endangerment issues. Joining us to discuss these three stories are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Tony McAuley, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Ramon Vargas, weekend editor and reporter for The Guardian. And Sophie Kasakove, staff writer, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Go over to Tony first, because there is a strike looming on our docks. Does it look like it's going to happen?
Yeah, the local president of the ILA said it was 99.9% sure. So that's midnight on Monday, October 1st. They will start picketing down at Felicity Street entrance to the Napoleon Avenue dock there. It's just for the container workers, the ones who bring the big containers off the ships, put them on trucks and railway. So about 800 workers of the 1,300 Louisiana ILA members will be off. But it could spread, actually. That's one of the worries. And, immediately it's going to just stop a lot of traffic, a lot of goods coming in and going out of the port. And the big worry really nationally, it's a national strike, of course, or it's on the East Coast. All the ILA workers cover the Eastern Gulf ports, different union on the West Coast. But it could have an impact on inflation, which was just getting under control. Yeah. And obviously we're only 4 or 5 weeks away from a general election, and it's not a very opportune time. And that's why a lot of people, including Senator Cassidy here, has been asking the Biden administration to step in and use their power under the Taft-Hawley Act to stall the strike for at least 80 days to allow some more time to talk. But they've been deadlocked for months, the two parties. So this will affect the Port of New Orleans, right? Any other ports? To a small extent, Port Allen, Baton Rouge, but the vast majority of the containers come in through Port of New Orleans. It's about 400,000 a year of those standard big boxes that you can imagine. About 20,000 up at Port Allen, so it's very much skewed down here. So you say container. I mean, it's container cargo, containerized cargo, and bulk cargo. Bulk cargo is not going to be impacted, but what is bulk cargo? Well, yeah, more and more of all products have been moving on to containers. That's why that's been for quite a long time where all the growth in trade has been. But big sort of mined products and large awkward bits of steel and other types of kit, that's bulk or break bulk. However, there is a worry that there'll be secondary strikes because it's the other half of the ILA workers handle a lot of that type of cargo. So there's a worry that if this is prolonged, it could spread.
Didn't containerization really change the way longshoremen work? I mean, the whole procedure. I mean, you're unloading things with big machines rather than carrying sacks off of a ship. I mean, did it change it, and did it change their work, their benefits and circumstances?
It's, that's one of the two main agenda items. One is money, of course. They're looking for, it's not public, but the conjecture is it's about 77% increase that they're looking for the master development, the master agreement to cover all of the workers. But the other half of it is protection against losing jobs to automation, because obviously, as you point out, quite a lot of these jobs have been lost to automation as, you don't have guys shucking bananas off the boats, or, as you imagine in the olden times.
Well,
now
moving
it's guys-
bales of cotton, like you see those old big pictures.
It's people moving, using cranes and other equipment to
Right.
take these containers off ships.
And the containerized element of this really has just only expanded. I mean, that's why we're looking at this controversial expansion of the port in St. Bernard.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's because the ships have been getting bigger and bigger, holding more and more containers. They're not able to get up to the Napoleon Avenue, the largest of the ships. So they've been looking for a major expansion at what they call the Louisiana International Terminal at Violet, which would very greatly expand the volume that Port of New Orleans could handle. And Port of New Orleans, is one of the great Gulf ports, but it's been losing out. I mean, in the past decade, Mobile has gone from very little to overtaking the container volume that Port New Orleans has. So it's a worry,
So are they that far apart, Tony? Is there any chance that maybe at the last minute they'll come to an agreement or stall this strike in some
I'm not
way?
privy to the negotiations at the national level. No, I mean, this is the funny thing is that they've actually agreed locally. The ILA members have agreed with the local companies that they work for here. There's 2 major companies locally, their own agreements, but they cannot move forward until the master agreement at the national level has been negotiated. So, and that's one organization that negotiates on behalf of all of the company operators versus the ILA, So, what we have in terms of inflation, it depends on, which products are affected the most. And there's been a lot of movement in the last few months to try to bring in products ahead of a strike. It's been anticipated. So you've seen a big volume increase in Port of New Orleans as well as elsewhere in product brought in. So, but still, I mean, we're the biggest coffee port in the country. And you've seen the price of coffee futures over the last few months going up considerably in anticipation
Because of that supply chain
already,
interruption.
because of worries, yeah.
When you mention Mobile, it reminds me a couple of years ago when Mobile surprised everybody when Mobile took the banana business away from New Orleans. And New Orleans had just gotten it back, and all of a sudden Mobile hit. And one reason they gave was that Mobile had better transportation, more arteries going to the center, to the center of the country. So.
Well, yeah.
Well, it's competitive. I mean, certainly,
competitive,
it's
We're pretty
competitive just
unbeatable,
within
though,
the
'cause
state of Louisiana. The
we have
port
all the
business,
railways. We have the river. Our roads maybe aren't the best, but that's part of the project over at Violet is to increase the number of road arteries out. So.
Right. Okay, we'll see what happens. Thanks a lot, Tony. Sophie, let's go on over to you because Orleans Parish voters are going to be making a decision as to whether or not to agree to what was called a housing fund, affordable housing fund, dedicated money within the city budget. Why don't you tell us more about that?
Right, so this is something that New Orleans voters are going to see on their ballots in November. It's a charter amendment that's been proposed that would dedicate 2% of the city's general fund each year into an affordable housing trust fund, which is basically money that would be set aside for different housing programs.
So by housing programs, are we talking about actual housing construction? And this money carves out, about 2% of the city's budget each year, and it's going to generate, about $8 million, I think, is what they suspect.
17 million, actually,
around
would be
17
the estimate based on this year.
And so who would, a lot of questions there. I mean, who would oversee this money? Who would determine how it's spent? How do they anticipate it will be spent? How will it alleviate the affordable housing issue? Right. What are the answers to those questions?
So the City Council passed an ordinance a couple weeks ago now that laid out essentially how it would be spent in sort of general terms, with basically each year it would be determined by the Finance New Orleans and the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority, which are 2 sort of quasi-public agencies that operate outside of City Hall, but with City Hall oversight. So they would be responsible for distributing the funds. It would also be overseen by an advisory committee, which is made up of different appointees, including affordable housing groups, getting some appointees there. So some of the things that have been discussed as uses for the money, a lot of attention right now has been put on insurance, on the insurance crisis, and sort of both advocates and officials who are in support of the fund have talked about using it to subsidize affordable housing developers who are putting projects together but are sort of struggling with the high costs of insurance, once they sort of approach closing on a project and they have a gap. So some of this, they're saying, could be used for gap financing. Some of it could be used, they're saying, to support landlords who are trying to, fortify their properties to, in that way, sort of support renters as well.
Would direct rental assistance be part of this fund?
No, so that's something that Councilmember Leslie Harris, who's sort of been leading the charge on this, spoke to that question at a recent City Council meeting where they were passing this ordinance. There were people, at City Council pushing for additional funding for rental assistance, so that would be direct subsidy to renters who are struggling. But Councilmember Harris said, we can't use this funding for that because essentially it would eat up the entire fund, and suggested that that's something that would be, better funded by the federal government.
And so when do voters go to the polls to vote on this? Is this in the
November,
big
yeah.
November?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. So I guess there'll be an information campaign out there for voters who might have questions?
Yeah, apparently there's a website up that they have. They told me that they would be putting up yard signs and things like that. So I think the idea is that voters should be hearing more about it.
Yeah, and there's a dedicated website to it too, right? Yeah, okay. All right, thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Sophie. All righty, let's go on over to you, Ramon, because once again, we're anticipating a trial for regarding one of the pedophile priests, and that has, again, been delayed.
Yeah, Lawrence Hecker, I think that one of the things that makes this case unique is that this is a defendant who has admitted to serial child molestation, right, in clear terms. He is charged with rape and kidnapping in a case to which he has pleaded not guilty. That is outside of his admissions, but obviously the pattern of behavior is established. As briefly as possible, right, it gets to, he's had eight trial delays, I think, since January. I think there was a long time about, he's 93. This is a reportable fact. The church, took steps to cover up his past and to keep him from being exposed, which is why it's until he's 93 that he's being brought to trial. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of back and forth about whether he was mentally competent to stand trial, right? Whether he could assist his attorneys, because he and I think that the big stick up there is that he has the short-term memory problems, but for the most part, can remember in crystal clarity things from long ago, right? So it's just a question about whether that affects his ability to assess his attorneys. He was found on September 5th to be fragilely competent, but the operative word there being competent to stand trial. Morning of jury selection comes around on Tuesday, and
This past Tuesday?
He checks into the hospital with a urinary tract infection, which obviously I think a lot of observers were, a little suspicious of. I mean, as far as whether that required a hospitalization and whether he could show up in the afternoon if he did go to the hospital to get checked out for that. But then I think that the big shoe to drop was the judge, Judge Ben Willard, at the last minute, indicating that he was going to recuse himself from the case, transfer the case to another courtroom. Citing negative activity or negativity from the prosecution.
But regarding a different case.
Regarding a different case.
Because Judge Willard had been handling this case from the beginning, right?
Since September of 2023, so for more than a year. I would tell you that, and briefly I can describe, I guess, the back and forth, and this has been reported in local media. The prosecutor, Ned McAuley, in a separate case, had moved to recuse Judge Willard from the case because there was a juror in that case had made a pass at a female DA staffer. Ned McAuley, requests the removal of the juror, and the judge ends up removing McAuley and the female staffer, describing her as, quote, a distraction. If you've been in Judge Willard's courtroom, I mean, this is very on brand for kind of how he conducts his business. It can be very chaotic in there. Obviously, in the Hecker case, that sort of last-minute delay obviously did not sit well with the victim in the case, who came in from out of state. I don't know to what extent there's a concept of like re-traumatizing, like someone who has been prepared to relive their, alleged strangulation and rape in a church bell tower at the hands of Lawrence Hecker. And obviously that was very unsettling to him. There were several other of victims who have previously accused Hecker, who were ready to testify in support of the main victim in the case.
So everything was ready to go.
Everything was ready to go at the last minute. It was delayed. Wasn't immediately rescheduled. It has been transferred to the courtroom of Judge Nandi Campbell, who has a reputation for kind of running her courtroom much differently than Judge Willard, and I know that has given optimism to at least the district attorney's office that we could see a resolution to the case.
Because the DA was beside himself on this, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, at one point it seemed like he was truly like fighting back tears. Jason Williams seemed to be fighting back tears at the thought of having to call all these witnesses and explain to them, what happened and why it took until the past the 11th hour even to decide that we weren't going to move forward with the trial.
Because there were a lot of moving parts and a lot of people involved in a case like this.
Again,
and they were ready to go.
Right, and again, the majority of them, have obviously been prepared and have not only have recounted in preparation for the trial, like the worst moments of their lives, and then I think to kind of I don't know how much thought was given to them when that decision was made to delay the case.
One thing I think his story did was it certainly showed the intrigue between the prosecutors and the judges. Is this kind of stuff going on all the time?
Yeah, so I think that it does. Obviously, I'd covered that courthouse earlier in my career, and I think that one of the attorneys, there was a civil attorney for the star witness of the case, who obviously conducts his business in a much different setting, and to describe that he was just befuddled at that's kind of how something like that could happen, in I think just kind of being used to much more like orderly ways of doing business. It's like a different planet. It's what it seemed like for him. And obviously, if you don't have a lot of experience in the courts, you're just a layperson witness. Obviously, it's like what on earth is going on, and I can understand that.
It was kind of shocking. So okay, I guess we'll see when it will be rescheduled in the other courtroom now.
Yes, ma'am.
Okie doke. Thanks a lot, Ramon. E, over to you. A list from the Landmark Society.
Yeah, really good group, the Louisiana Landmark Society, and their mission in life is to just draw attention to things that need to be done in terms of the landscape and issues out there. Saving the path, and they themselves work out of the Pitot House on Bayou St. John. So anyway, they come out with this annual list of really 9 issues, and it's not properties per se. Some are philosophical sort of things that they have on their list, and some are just landscape issues. Like number 1 is something about the tree canopies. Well, we may take this for advantage in New Orleans, but there are a lot of spots you're driving along, and then all of a sudden you see this beautiful canopy of trees, usually oak trees, crossing each other for a few blocks. And we have several of those throughout the city, and they just really make it more picturesque. They have some environmental value too, but it points out that they're losing more. This particular picture is one of the trees that was cut down somewhere. Anyway, what they're saying is there needs to be more legalization, more legislation to protect these trees. And the utilities now are complaining about it too. The utilities are saying, well, he's getting in the way of our wires and all this. When people complaining about the electricity's out, it's because of the trees. And so that there needs to be more protection for the trees. The other, which is kind of interesting, is what's happened to the Catholic churches. That since Hurricane Katrina, I think they said they've lost like 40 churches in the area. And this isn't just a religious issue, it's a visual issue, because the churches are just part of a neighborhood. I mean, they're a beautiful part of the neighborhood. And we've lost a lot of them. And they're all just classic, Greek revival, Byzantine revival, all those kind of revivals, and they're lost to the community. Well, the idea is, okay, well, let's sell them and do something with it. And people say, how about a community center? You don't need 40 community centers in New Orleans. And people say, a theater, this should make a good theater. But the fact is, yeah, they have pews where people would listen to Mass, but they're not adapted for theaters. You need different kind of seating and different kind of sounds. And so as nice as they are and as beloved as buildings are, that there's not a big market for them.
No. Many have been adapted, though, for reuse of some sort.
A couple have.
The Lord is one uptown on Napoleon is being.
Yeah, and well,
Right.
the Marigny
There's an
Opera,
event
the
space.
thing called the Marigny
Right.
Opera House and the new Marigny Opera House. And so it's been done, but probably not 40 times.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you have one
Yeah,
here.
they can't sell the one on Canal, which was where Louis Armstrong was baptized. Supposedly, that's been on the market.
Yeah, I think that was Sacred Heart. Yeah, about and so yeah, it would be nice if we had all these new theaters. But what do you do with a church? Okay, and then the other thing I dare say most of us wouldn't have been aware of, it certainly me, is something called the Old Slaughterhouse. This is on Laborde Street, and this is right at St. Bernard. There was a time when there was a lot of slaughterhouses in New Orleans because there were so many animals being butchered and going down the river. Well, all the waste was dumped into the river, so you can imagine how disgusting that was and how unhealthy. So at one point, the legislature passed a law that said you can only have one slaughterhouse, one combined one, but it's got to be downriver from the city. So that was one that was built. And then ultimately there was lawsuits against it, and people said, no, we don't want this. The butchers didn't like it. They said it violated their rights.
But in terms of the structure, though, it's just nothing is happening with that right now, and so it is considered
Right,
endangered.
and they say it's significant in terms of the brickwork that was
Right.
used, that it's architecturally significant.
Yeah, well, so that's Louisiana Landmark Society.
Louisiana
You go to their
Landmark
website
Society.
and see the entire list there.
Yeah,
what
a
they're
guy named
considered.
Tony Marino and Erin Holmes, a woman who've done a lot of the work on this. But they do good work, and it's important, because who else is going to talk about the old slaughterhouse?
Right,
So,
exactly. Okay,
yeah.
thanks a lot. Sophie, let's go on over to you, because Hanno is having some changes, too.
So this week, the executive director, Yvette Hester, announced her resignation. That was on Tuesday, and sort of follows several months of sort of heightened scrutiny of the agency over some issues, mostly at their properties that they own and manage.
And of course, Hanno is the housing authority
Yes.
of New Orleans, which, do they directly oversee all of these, the various, units and complexes, projects that they've got? Or is it a third-party type of thing?
So the majority of Hanno's work is actually administering the voucher program, Section 8, and then a smaller portion of their properties are ones that they own themselves. And then within that, there's many that are managed by third-party companies, and then there's a smaller amount that they actually oversee directly.
And one big issue is vacancies
Right, so that's something.
at a time when we need affordable housing.
Right, so that's something that was sort of drawn attention to by HUD, which is sort of the overall regulator of housing authorities across the country, including Hanno. And they, in a recent, or 2022, but it's the most recent that we have, their rankings, they reduced Hanno to a substandard management score, which is basically them saying that you have too many vacant units and you're not turning them around quickly enough, getting new tenants into those units.
And so they're searching for leadership again.
Yes.
And when will the present leader leave?
Yeah, she put in her resignation effective November 4th, I believe.
Okay, is the search on yet, or have we heard anything yet?
I asked the president of the board that. She said that they haven't started the
Haven't started
process
yet.
yet. That was a couple days ago she said that. Yeah.
All right, Sophie, thanks. And Tony, let's wrap up with you, because you had a piece about a former New Orleans saint who's having some housing difficulties.
Yeah, it touches on some of those affordable housing issues. He was a Hall of Famer, actually. He was still holds records for punt returns, single game punt returns, and kickoff returns. Tyrone Hughes lives in Marrero, and he ended up in an affordable housing development. He worked with the person who was doing it to go in and kind of manage a seven house unit development, and then he ended up in one of the houses, which was all fine until the first NBC bank collapsed. They ended up with the mortgage on these houses in a rent-to-own program in Jefferson Parish, which was managed between the community development nonprofit that he bought the house from and Jefferson Parish. So he's been trying for years to find out, once the bank collapsed and the nonprofit went out of business, where he's to pay his $800 a month. and he cannot get a straight answer. And now he finds himself named in a lawsuit. He's actually not named, but he's referred to in a lawsuit together with one other occupant of one of the houses as a squatter there. And it's like one of those legal nightmares, you know.
Even though he went into it rent to own.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but I know that you received questions about why would a New Orleans saint need to be part of a plan like this, affordable housing plan?
Yeah, I mean, he's very straightforward about it. He's a good guy. He played in the early to mid 90s, or he finished at the end of the 90s. 6-year career, which is very average for the NFL. And at the time he was playing, they could be earning sort of mid 6-figure gross salaries, which is very good money for the 90s, but not, you know, retirement money, as he put it. You know, we all, you know, players like me have to work for a living after we retire from the league. So he was a coach in high school, various high schools, including St. Aug, where he graduated.
Jesuit High School as well.
And Jesuit, yeah.
He
you
was there
that?
when I was there, yeah.
And then he had other jobs like, you know, selling building supplies and stuff like that. But I mean, you know, so he needed an affordable house like many people.
Right.
And he was in this program at $800 a month.
So he's just now caught up in this really complex situation, and so it sort of demonstrates also with the failure of the bank has impacted in so many ways.
There were I don't think that was really recognized. I mean, well, it wouldn't have been until later, but many people didn't realize, even the good loans, as they were called, that were sold to Hancock Whitney. A lot of people weren't informed for months and months afterwards, and they had to find out where to pay their mortgages, you know, before they built up, you know, really huge arrears. And then the vulture funds, his own was bought by one of these vulture funds, as they're called, who buy the loans for pennies on the dollar and then just basically go after the people as debt collectors, you know. He never heard from them, and now for whatever reason they won't even return his phone calls, because it appears this vulture fund is in the lawsuit with Jefferson Parish, who also won't give us straight answers about what's going on there. It appears as if they just want to take the houses and not, you know, figure out how to deal with these people who've been living there for over a decade. You know.
So Mr. Hughes is really caught up in this catch-22, as
yeah,
it were.
I try to avoid using Kafkaesque in the story, but yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
Really, we wish him all the best of luck with that. Okay, other stories, E.
Yeah, well, a lot of people, I think, were concerned about the Hurricane Helena that was going to the Florida Gulf Coast. A lot of people from this area, when they go to the beach, now they're going like to the Panhandle and Highway 38, where there's beautiful architecture and all that. And early in the week, it looked bad. And in Walton County, which is the main county, the schools were closed. But we don't know everything yet, but it looks like it did okay. It looks like it survived, that the hurricane took that turn to the east at the last moment and went away from it, just like we always hope for when it's coming, you know, the turn to the east to Biloxi. Well, this time it took a turn to the
it went
east,
into the Big Bend area, just right north of Tampa. Tony.
I'm just sticking with the port. They just named a new chairman, and what's interesting about it is it's one of these appointments that Governor Landry's been making, kind of breaking the norms of the past, to put in his people that are very sort of close to him politically. And the person is the lawyer of Shane Guidry, who I think a lot of people know is one of his close mates. Right.
Yeah, and you have a piece about that. I just
today.
saw that later today. Okay, Ramon.
A Catholic diocese in Long Island settled its bankruptcy for about $320 million. I am curious to see whether the Archdiocese of New Orleans, if it does settle its bankruptcy, settles for about the same amount. They have about the same number of abuse claimants, even though the Archdiocese of New York is the Archdiocese in New York is much larger than the one here.
Okay, Ramon, and real quick, Sophie.
Yeah, the biggest city government news today was the indictment of Randy Farrell, and our team obviously is going to be watching pretty closely to see what comes out of that.
Okay, very good. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here, and thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
This program is brought to you in part by the Eugenie and Joseph Jones Family Foundation, a local foundation proud to support education, the arts, and culture in the greater New Orleans area.